something like you're going to do an exercise. It's almost like a written test, but it's not graded. It's just for you to check yourself how much you know about psychology. All right, right at the start. Okay, I'll start this first, so you can see the first set of slides, and then I've also asked Karen to send out the. I've asked Karen to send you all the PDF copy of it. I didn't send it out earlier because I don't want you all to see. Okay, and then go find the answers first. So this is really a quick check. All right. So I already mentioned it's here. We're going to do all this. All right. Today. And here's the first page. Now, while you take a look at the first page, let me go check whether they have sent out that. The format. Yeah, thanks. EFP stands for extrasensory perception. This is it's very common out there when you watch Hollywood. They'll tell you the sixth sense, psychic powers, those kind of things. All right, it's not even all choose one. It's just true false to make it easy for you to respond. Some of you are still doing so. Let's wait a while before I flip the page. So where is the ESP? Extrasensory. ESP is the short form for extra sensory perception. Okay, laymen call it sixth sense, psychic powers. Sometimes they even call it supernatural powers, but most people understand it as psychic powers. Okay. All right, you don't have to copy the question because I've emailed you the PDF copy. You just put maybe you just number it and then put your true false, T or F. That's good enough. Done? Yeah. I think yeah. Now let's go on to the next page. If you are not sure, just best guess the answer. Yeah, I think just 2 more slides to go. Done? Anyone still doing up to 13? Okay, let's look at the next one. Okay, done. All right, last one. Some questions are pretty technical, or it looks technical. If you don't know, like I said, just best guess. Like, what's hypochondriasis? Or what's schizophrenia? I think schizophrenia is still pretty well understood by now. Hypochondriasis, maybe not, right? But we are not graded, so don't worry. Anyone still not done yet? I think the people online should be done too. Okay, I think so. I can only see a few people online, but no one seems to be protesting. So okay. Now most of you can do some of the questions. Maybe because you already learned about it from the internet, maybe. All right, from books. Now let's see how you fare. All right. So what's your score? Gosh. Did any one of you have two answers? Anyone with all false?
Most people.
Most people the truth, okay? Now the thing is, what does this exercise tell us about psychology that you pick up out there? So if you pick it up from the internet, it could be folk psychology. It could be just rumors. But a lot of people believe that. And they have become the so-called de facto knowledge, all right, of most people. And the one thing is, actually, this is not like I happily come up with it. Let me see if I can, I think I wrote it down. Oh yes, take a look at this. I know I skipped one slide, I'll go back to it. This quiz was actually part of an experiment. It was done many years ago, 1997. And at that time, right, they didn't just picture on like people who didn't know. So this bunch of psychologists, they threw these 25 questions to people, students, university students who had studied psychology. Some of them are like your first time encountering psychology, so they were first year students. But if you look at this, they also had they also had second year, third year, and honors year students. And the surprising thing is, doesn't matter where, only, in fact, everyone, even those people with some knowledge, they still rely on false information. Then you wonder, how did they even pass their second year, third year, right? Then who the hell is treating me out there if they are clinical psychologists? Oh. Okay, this is the slide I skipped. So if you had guessed at the answers, all right, and you try to guess based on some kind of recollected information, you know that's not reliable. If you think that, oh yes, I know, because I got it from the internet, because I got it from this book, that book, a lot of self-help books out there, they are also promoting folk psychology. So what is this thing called folk psychology? In today's standards, right, everything is about evidence-based. Meaning, you have to, even if you believe in something, or people who believe in something, they have to go out there, test it out before they profess, all right, their beliefs to be true. And sometimes after testing it, they can be biased. Humans are usually biased anyway. So they have to wait for another group to replicate independently the test, and then they collate their data and see if it cancels out. If it cancels out, then you have to have a third group, fourth group coming in to retest the idea. After multiple testing, we will usually get some kind of opinion where the various opinions will then, some of the biasness will cancel out because people have different beliefs. In the end, those things that do not get cancelled out, they become agreed upon, and those things form the theory. They need not be the real truth. They could be like 95% of the truth. Because after all, you still have some biasness there, you still have human error. But we are hoping that a lot of people looking at the same problem, and they do the testing independently, they come up with something close to the actual truth. Now, over the years, there will be improvements in measurement technology. There will be improvements in other areas that can also be used in psychology. So then, over a period of maybe 10, 20 years, some of the old things are then retested. And this does not just apply to psychology, it applies to every field of science. So those of you who have done science since your maybe say primary school, secondary school, you might have heard of something like that before. All right, that the world today, all the technology we have, all the advancement that we have, it's all based on evidence. So what is evidence? Evidence is independent testing by different people, and then they then compare, they criticize one another. They do it constructively. Okay? And ultimately, the consensus is something that applies. So that's why we have better quality of living today. You find that for thousands of years, humans were stuck in what? Primitive and feudal ages. They couldn't break out of it. Of course, there was oppression, blah, 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 but technology, comforts of living didn't start to flourish until about 1500s, where so-called a bunch of people started the scientific movement and stopped believing in just hearsay. Of course, it wasn't a smooth story, but that's history. I'll leave you to read about that. What I'm trying to say is that in psychology, the same principle applies, except it was much later. If you just look at European development, because they have better documented movement in science and technology, all right, they broke away from the old ways earlier than other societies. So they started breaking away sometime in the middle 1500s. Of course, you can say, oh, history said that it started like 1000 AD, 1200 AD. Yeah, but it was still filled with a lot of all these Dark Ages myths. And all the cults and religious groups, they have a lot of power. If they feel that you're wrong, they can put you to death. So that's why nowadays you read something about what? Witch hunt, where in the past, witches, maybe there are really witches, we don't know. But the point is, in the past, people could be accused of witchcraft. Whether they are real witches or not, they are dead meat anyway. Like for example, one way to test out whether a person who professes in science or some kind of knowledge, but their knowledge is non-conformist. So they don't follow the usual pattern. And instead of testing it out, what happened is the religious group can come. So if you've read about like Christian inquisitors, what they will do is they will just tie the person up, torture the person, and make the person conform to the normal standards. If not, they will dump the person into the river. So they leave the person there sometimes for half an hour. If you die, okay, that means you're not a witch. Good. Because you're a human, that's why you die. If you don't die, then you're burned as a witch. So that's how they maintain knowledge. There is no way you can fight against what is believed by everyone. Alright? So in 1500s, they started to break away, and a lot of religious groups started to lose their power. you find that throughout history, different cultures, different societies then started to take on this trend. Psychology didn't have this trend until about middle 1800s. So it's like 300 years behind biology, physics, chemistry, all these natural sciences. Okay? Because it is very difficult to prove psychological concepts. And normal testing is basically impossible back then. All right? Even behavioral, I'm not even talking about MRI scans and all this that we have nowadays. All right? So psychology is slow, and a lot of things are still very complex. So people like simple stuff. So that's why you find that the internet is full of all these things that people use. Look at that. Even students who were trained to almost completion, they sometimes still succumb to all these myths and rumors that are on the internet. Now, of course, if you correct yourself, then you will have better resistance against. I think the one practical thing to take away is that sometimes you find that all these advertisements, right, they are selling you strange things. They are not even applicable. Now, one of the things, like, for example, will be what? How many of you have heard before this thing? Like, if the lady is pregnant, all she has to do is put the headphones onto her abdomen, play some nice music with some subliminal oral beat, the child will be born a genius. Heard before, right? Many people bought this, right? And they have even studies showing you the baby actually reacts. So at about easily, right, about 3 to 4 months old, the baby already, the fetus inside is already reacting to the sound. And they literally have that. So they sell programs where you will let the child listen to something, the child will be smarter. How many of you have come across that? Lots of people, right? I can see from the internet. So I don't know how many people in online also raise their hands. Do you see a number of people out there buying these kind of programs? Oh, yes, right? Some of you nodding your heads. That's right. But your child going through such programs will not be smarter on birth. Children will react because the auditory senses they develop. All right, by about 3 to 5 months, it's very well developed. So the fetus is really just reacting to sounds. And because the nervous system is developing, right, starting from about 3rd week, so by about 3rd month, the bulk of the nervous system is already intact. It's not fully developed, but it's intact. So what it does is, you play some sounds, but the fetus has never encountered strange sounds before. It is just a new, novel, we call it novel stimulus. So what it's doing is the nervous system of the fetus is reacting to the strange sound. Period. The nervous system has not developed to the point where it's capable of thinking like a human person. Not even a child's. Okay? So they happily show that it's reacting, therefore it's thinking. Bang. People buy because and of course they love to see the babies dance inside the womb. Alright? So these are the things that we want to debunk. Alright? And of course this was something I mentioned. Going back to that story. It's there. Positive psychology is a relatively new branch in psychology. And the problem is it started not because of evidence rooted in positive psychology. Now, if you look around, right, some of you might know. So now I throw the ball to your court. What are some of the topics, right, that positive psychology look into? Resilience, yes. What else? Later you have a chance to discuss. But what are, other than resilience, what else? None of you come because of positive side.
Happiness.
Happiness, resilience, and how shall I address it?
Stephanie.
Stephanie. Okay, I'll try to remember you, okay? Because now we are all limited to just 1/3 of facial recognition. Now, okay, Stephanie said happiness, all right? Trying to understand what's happiness, trying to understand what's resilience. Let's have one more answer. What else is positive psychology looking into? Strengths? Physical strength? No, right? What kind of strengths? Anyone? Mental. Alright, so sometimes it's on mental fortitude, that kind of strength. Sometimes they look at character strength, whether a person has better willpower, although we drop that term nowadays. Now, it would be good if Martin Seligman, the founder, started this field and actually did proper research into resilience, into optimism, into joy, happiness, contentment, meaningfulness in life, but he didn't. Because by then, I think it's because he was pretty old by then, no? He was 50, 60 years old person, and he already did his PhD like 30 years back. So it's kind of tough to just start all over again. He was, however, inspired by his daughter. And the daughter was complaining, "Dad, you're a grouch." Because the dad was a clinical psychologist. So the founder of Positive Psych, Martin Seligman, he was a clinical psychologist, all right? And he dealt with all the depression, learned helplessness, basically all the sad things. And maybe that rubbed off on him, while his daughter complained. And with that complaint, he realized that, yeah, why are all psychologists talking about morbid stuff? But he didn't restart the whole thing. Instead, he borrowed from the field of social psychology, cognitive psychology. So he took evidence that was already there, repackaged it, emphasized on positive psychology aspects. But that pissed off a lot of people in this circle. Because you start off something, you start to run seminars, you teach, you get the money, you get the fame. In this field, right, just like any other academic field, publish or perish. So the publish what? They publish their findings, they publish the knowledge, meaning you have to go through the hard work to discover new knowledge. Then you can show the world what you found out, and then you get your acclaim and maybe your other rewards. But Martin Seligman didn't do that. He wrote on his already established fame. He borrowed evidence from other fields and he established this. But lay people like this. So it took the world by storm. So the politics is that in traditional psychologists, especially some of the social psychologists, they are really frustrated with Martin Seligman. I mean, let's not talk about the politics being played at UPenn, University of Pennsylvania. All right, just know that it's ugly. All right, and so they whacked this group a lot. They started to have a big divide in order to make sure that people over here talk about things that this bunch of people can accept, and that when this bunch of people talk about things, this group of people, the positive side people, can understand well. So in a lot of universities and schools that talk about positive side, they also have foundation side in order to bridge this gap. Usually people don't tell you the dark secrets there, all the politics. I didn't tell you much about it, okay? But I did highlight that there's something there. So it's not a bunch of roses, okay? But that's all I'm gonna say. It's after all recorded. Later I get chairs thrown at me, I lose rice bowl. Not very nice, huh? Okay, these kind of things can talk as a side. Yes.
If you say clinical psychology, social psychology, completely other.
Basically you can count 20 over. Okay, but it's coming. So at the end of today, we will take a look at that. Now that you have some background, all right, let's look at what psychology is about. I'm gonna tell you that there is a very bad word. The bad word is actually behavior. It's unclear. Psychology is defined as the science of behavior. If you are interested in human psychology, then human behavior. Otherwise, animal psychology, insect psychology, they exist too. So we are looking at behaviors. The word scientific simply means that you don't espouse like what philosophers used to do. Doesn't matter which culture. In Asian culture, in South American cultures, in European cultures, they used to philosophize about human behavior. We just don't do this nowadays. We test, we may observe and form some opinions, but you still have to test out, measure the changes in behavior before you say something about that behavior. So that's basically science, to test and to measure. So you have something concrete to describe the behavior. But that's where the bad word comes in. Because it's contextual. Sometimes psychologists tell you behavior, they mean the broad thing. Sometimes they use the word behavior, it means specifically actions. So you have to listen out to the context. Same thing happens with textbooks. If you read books, they will use the word freely, but you just go according to the context. Are they referring to specific actions? Or they are just referring to the thinking, the feelings, and the specific actions. So behavior as a word, it can be seen as the broad word. It can be seen as the specific actions. Okay? There's no need to be confused by it because now you know it's by context. Alright? Okay. So that's easy to understand. Now, let's do a quick recap before we jump into history. We're then going to talk about the history of how psychology started, modern psychology, and there are lessons to be learned from that. That's where later on you will have your discussion groups. Alright? Now, so far what have we talked about? What is psychology? What's psychology? You need some tips? What's psychology? Anyone?
Scientific study of why they behave.
Okay, so very straightforward textbook kind of answer. It's the scientific study of mind and behavior. Why is the word behavior bad? Anyone?
That's true.
Because it's based on context. Okay, so you can't be very sure. For people who are acquainted with it, that's okay. Problem lies with lay people. So lay people sometimes misunderstand what they read because they fail to narrow in or focus in on the actual highlighted concept. All right, that's why one of the reasons behind why folk psychology is very rampant on the internet. Because people sometimes read very quickly and they misunderstand the concept. It's not always just all the HO stuff being there. Like, how many of you have heard before emotional intelligence? I'm looking at this screen because I want to see. I can also ask the online people, but I don't think so. Anyway, how many people have heard before emotional intelligence or EQ? Yeah? Heard before, right? Did you know that? Okay, the bestseller book is called EQ. It was written, first edition was published in 1995 by Daniel Goleman. But did you know that he wasn't the first person to talk about it? Sometime around 1983, 1985, Mayer, Salovey, these were the original pioneers who delved into EQ. And they were talking about why EQ is a complement to IQ. Okay? But funny thing is, before Daniel Goleman said about it, right? So remember, in the 90s, something that was very hot was that everybody started talking about EQ. Why? Because the pioneers, Mayer and Salovey, they published and wrote it like scientific papers. People read and use that to cure their insomnia. They fall asleep. Then when Daniel Goleman wrote it like storybook, right? It became bestseller. So if you're interested in that, you can go and read, but I strongly recommend read only the first edition. Some people say, but 1995 not outdated. A lot of the concepts mentioned by Daniel Goleman back then still applies. The only thing is, I think later on he chased after bestseller status a lot. So by the time he hit 2000, right, he wrote second edition, third edition to the book. But those editions, he started to speculate about some things that are not evidence-based. So then it became, you wonder at some of the claims he made. All right, and lay people, they don't cross-reference that with all the scientific data. So when you read, you have no idea whether Goleman was talking about the real things that everyone has observed, or it's just his speculation. So his first book is actually very good. It was good because it was based on facts. It was based on discovered facts. It was written in a layman's way. So I think that beats all the scientific jargon. All right. But beyond that, then you just have to be careful. Okay, so we have recapped the definition. We have talked about what is the dangerous word, and is common sense to understand psychology useful or not so useful? Not so useful because you will fall into this cohort, right? Okay, so that's the thing we covered for the first half hour. Now let's look at, you can't try to understand a subject without looking at its roots. What are some of the mistakes made by the pioneers? How can we avoid such mindset? I mean, even if we don't talk about the findings, the evidence-based stuff, you would at least want to avoid the flawed thinking patterns of people in past. So they may be modern psychologists, but humans are humans, right? We make errors. So let's begin with the first. The word is called school, but I think to better understand it is the first branch. Now, you know that like clinical psychology, okay, that's one specialization of psychology. Earlier on, I also mentioned social psychologists, cognitive psychologists. No, these are specialization. In the past, they had, but because they are still very, very broad, we don't usually call those modern psychology that came up in the 1800s and the early 1900s. We don't call those specializations. Instead, we give them a term called school, S-C-H-O-O-L. So the first school was known as structuralism. And this was developed by the father of psychology, modern psychology. How many of you think his name is Freud? F-R-E-U-D. Yeah, so if there was a 26 question, then oops. No, it's not Freud. Oh yeah, it's written here, so I don't have to write that up. This guy, Wilhelm Wundt, German guy, he was the father of psychology, not Freud. Although Freud appears to be more famous than him. Okay? So his name keep appearing on the internet. Everybody thinks it's Freud. It's not. Wundt was called the father because psychology started as a form of philosophy. For thousands of years, cultists, religionists, shamans, philosophers, dictators, whatever, okay, all those people with authority, they have tried to understand human behavior because they need supporters. They want to know how to motivate people, to get people to do things and give them what they want. That's the idea behind dictatorship and authoritarianism, right? So they speculated. They never tested anything. They see and then they just apply. And so Wundt decided that no, we shouldn't just philosophize and speculate. We shouldn't just have a bunch of experts together and talk about it and think that we know it all. No. So instead, he advocated that there should be a university program where there is a lab to test out human behavior. And he decided to pull philosophizing out of psychology by making sure that all the behaviors we talk about, we quantify and measure them. So structuralism, obviously it comes from the word structure, right? Structure in English is just components, correct? So Wundt's main objective is to look at the components of human behavior. He wanted to measure every single bit of behavior, those sub-behaviors, and ultimately from all these little measurements, he wanted to piece everything together and predict what is the gross or overall human behavior. Then that's how he can predict. Well, he did his ideal was correct, but his approach, because in those days they don't have modern knowledge, it was still erroneous. But it was a good start. Okay, so let's focus on the good start. So structuralism is about identifying building blocks or components of human behavior. It was started by Wundt, and he didn't just philosophize. He decided that he pushed for university to make it into a proper educational syllabus based on evidence. So he started the lab. So today, if someone asks you, When did modern psychology start? What do you think is the year?
1839.
Seems like it, right? Actually, it's not. But we really don't know when it started. It's somewhere around 1850s to 1880s. I mean, just because Wundt said it doesn't mean that he was the first one, right? He probably discussed with a few people, so they had similar ideas. But he was the pioneer, he pushed for it. So, although somewhere between 1850 to 1880s was the start of modern psychology, but today, right, for convenience sake, we literally just smack 1879 there, based on the founding of the first lab. Okay, so now you know a bit more. And Wundt was only able to reach out to European countries. Remember, in those days, even telegram was a luxury. Okay, actually that wasn't at this time. It came out a bit later. So, no, sorry, telephone, not telegram. So telephone came out a bit later. So they had a lot of difficulty exchanging ideas. And one American academic learned about psychology. His name was Edward Titchener. He decided to become the student of Wilhelm Wundt. So he did his PhD, all right, under the guidance of Wundt. And then he went back to America with modern psychology knowledge. Okay? So that's how America also started to have psychology. Okay, so let's summarize this before I tell you the important thing, which you need to put a star there. The important thing is psychology started the useful information, all right, for you to exercise your bragging rights. Meaning your friend say, hey, you studied psychology before. Then you can say, yeah, now let me brag. I know psychology started at, you know what year or not? Your friend says, don't know. Then you say, 1879. So you see, you become famous just like psychology. Okay? Because now you have acquired bragging rights. Another thing is you start to tell people there was a lab. Now, here's the background. What's so important about this then? What does having a lab and having an established year as a program in a university highlight to people about psychology? Now it's starting to get serious, right? Don't treat it lightly because it is now the same well-researched field as any other technological, scientific, or educational field you find in established institutes of higher learning. Right? So to convince people, we don't use muscle power. We don't do it like ancient dictators. We don't confuse people with all these various beliefs. We just simply use facts. So that's one thing. Unfortunately, for Wundt, the problem was the way he did the experiments. He actually tried to do something, maybe what I can do is, anyone with, if I have one pencil here, does anyone have another pencil? And I need a volunteer. Maybe a guy would be more convenient. No, I don't need you to undress. Don't worry. Pencil? Yes, please. Something that is this pencil? Oh, okay. Okay. Maybe if you can just stand somewhere here. So, yeah, you don't have to unmask yourself. So, confidential still. Alright, what I'm going to do is I'm going to demonstrate something. Yeah, okay, those people are seeing this online, it may appear small, alright, but I'll show you, it looks normal here. Okay, it's just that the camera, it's a bit small. But, yeah, I think that's about as close as you can get without being blocked by this. What I'm going to do is, I'm going to touch him, alright, without him seeing, so I'm going to touch him, maybe ask him to close his eyes. I'm going to touch him on the finger, on the hand, with the sharp point here. Alright? Now I'm going to replicate something that may have been done by Wilhelm Wundt before. So you look at how it goes. Now, without looking at how I'm going to just touch the 2 points on him, he will have to tell me, alright, whether I'm touching him with 1, or two, all right, pencils. Okay? So now, if you just close your eyes and, okay, this is your hand. So I'm gonna do it here first. So all of you can see, right? Now, let's try with, okay, do this. Okay, I think camera can see it. How many pencils are touching you? One. Okay. Now let's try this and see if you can. How many? Two. Okay, this time he can feel. Alright, he got the two correct. Wow, okay. But now it's the test. Now you really have to. Okay. Now, I think from the camera it won't look clear, but all of you here, you should be able to see. Okay? Now, we just listen to how he said it, alright? How many? Two. Okay? One. One. Sorry? One. One, okay? Now, notice that, right? Okay, let's try one more time. One. Alright? Now, I'm gonna do on his maybe shoulder here. Maybe you just turn around. Yeah, you won't right now. So okay, ready? Yep. I think we have to turn some so you can see. Yeah. Now, one. 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 Two. Okay, now. Was his response accurate? And you are?
Louis.
Louis. Let's thank Louis. Now, I can't ask him because he was helping us. So, was his response accurate? What was not accurate about it? Oh. Now I have to come see me for nervous stimulation. Calm down. What was not so correct about his response? Anyone? Sometimes I what? I press both, but he answered one, right? Now, which was more accurate, on the hand or on the back? On the hand. On the hand, right, when I close up to about half a cm, right, he started to feel one spot. But over here, you find that at 2.5 cm, he still thought that it was one, correct? Of course, people will differ. Some of you may be more sensitive. Maybe you don't need 2.5 cm. You just do you 1.5 cm and then you start to feel it off. But the point is, think about it. Wilhelm Wundt liked to do testing on people, and after that he asked for their responses. Do you think people are able to give absolutely correct responses all the time? The answer is no. So his technique was always to give the stimulus to someone, then he asked the person to look or to listen or to feel, and then to report. This kind of self-report to a stimulus is called introspection. The problem with introspection is it's mostly not so accurate. Of course, if he was trying to measure the errors in human responses, this is the perfect study. But sometimes he was trying to measure sensitivity. Sometimes he was trying to measure biasness. Sometimes he was trying to measure like how one person may influence another person. Now all these things, right, will be off because if one person is not sensitive, he might influence another person to become less sensitive. Okay? So Wilhelm Wundt and Albert Titchener use basically the same thing. Alright, so the important thing here is you need to put a star is structuralism was a great start, but the method of investigation was flawed. So method of investigation, introspection. It relied too heavily on subjective responses where it's mostly not accurate. So ultimately, they still couldn't find out the real truth because it's always flawed responses. Got it?
Can you repeat that again?
Yep. So structuralism tries to understand the building blocks of human behavior. The idea is good because it decided to test and measure human behavior. But it was flawed because the method of investigation, which is introspection, is too subjective. So it usually garners erroneous responses. Thereby, we are unable to find out the real truth behind human behavior. Okay? All right. Now, at that time, when it started for about 50 years, there was really no strong challenge. But sometime about 15 to 20 years after the start of structuralism, remember, America has their own psychology because Albert Titchener brought psychology back to America and it took a different form there. You see, Americans, they still do. If you do studies in Singapore, you find that we love science subjects. Those of you who have been through streaming in early days in our education system, you find that earlier on there was like science stream, art stream, and commerce stream, right? Nowadays, I think they do away with the commerce stream. But back then, you find that the popular vote was given to science stream. But in US, they actually favor art stream. Okay? They like to think broader things. They like to be creative. Okay? Nothing wrong. Both sides have pros and cons. So in America, their culture is what? They like to philosophize, they like to speculate. So although they have high technology, they have high science, but you find that the way they approach it, all right, the test and measurement is universal throughout the world. But the way they approach a problem and try to devise a test, sometimes it's a bit different from people over here. So over at the side, all right, it's a bit different from European countries. They have something called functionalism. So this group of people, their main question is, can we try not to understand the building blocks? Because the building blocks of behavior are just building blocks. Can we try to understand why people behave in certain ways? Like, in other words, right, in layman's terms, the American psychologists wanted to answer the question, what is the purpose of behaving in certain ways? So I'm not interested in trying to know the building blocks and then predict what's going to happen. I'm trying to understand, right? If you behave in this way, what is the objective of behaving this way? Now, so so in other words, right, then they popularize themselves saying that they do a better job explaining. Rather, when the European people are doing prediction but they can't explain well, we can do the explanation better because we know the final outcome and the objective and the reasoning. All these are political talk. I just want you to focus on the key differences. On the European side, structuralism tries to understand psychology, looking at its components. Then here, people try to look at the objective. So you have people who look at the what? Structuralists look at it from the start point. What are the basic building blocks? Americans, functionalists look at it on the end point. What is the final purpose? So the leader of this group is someone called, where is his name? Oh, sorry, it's here. William James. And Americans and European, they are sometimes like loggerheads. So they die also have to have a father. So the father of American psychology, look at this word, there's an American here. Okay. Generally, universally we recognize William Wundt as the father of psychology, or at least modern psychology. But you want to give face to the Americans. So William James was called the father of American psychology.
What's the difference between psychology and modern psychology?
Because in the past they have all this philosophizing, right? Like I mentioned, I started the lesson saying that humans are selfish, or or if you look at certain Chinese classic texts, right, the three-word principle. The opening line is, all humans are born good. But all these are called philosophizing. Alright? Some philosophers think that humans are born with a blank slate of mind. It is also not true. Alright, testing has shown that we do have certain things burned into us. Now, but I'll have more of those later. So because of that, you see the structuralists try to understand all these components. But the functionalists decided that no, all these components, if you know them all, it's too complex. Let's just look at the outcome. And they are headed by this guy, who was a great philosopher. In fact, William James himself, he confessed that he didn't like to do experiments. He prefers to read and to philosophize. So he really old school type. Okay? Now, so there was a big clash. Ultimately, both of them died. The same with all conflicts, alright? Now, but before they die, what happened? Alright, let's look at what happened a little bit. First of all, there was this person called Albert Thorndike, American. In sometime around between 1900 to 1910, he graduated with a PhD in psychology. And because psychology was so new back then, he had no job. So he got nothing better to do, and he decided to observe his house cat's behavior. But with that, he became famous. Alright, we will have more to say maybe in lesson 5. But basically, Thorndike, after observing his cat, he decided to employ the structuralist method of measuring the cat's behavior. So he broke away. He was a functionalist because he was born in America. And so he was always wondering, like, why is my cat always trying to run out of my backyard? So he was thinking of that question. But he also decided that, why don't I just measure the number of times my cat successfully escaped from my garden? So in that case, he started to employ the methods used by structuralists, right? And here is where the Americans got lucky, alright? They started to combine the best of both worlds. Whilst the European people were still not ingrained in thinking in a structural way, Americans already started to have the good side of functionalism and the good side of structuralists. Just before Albert Thorndike became very famous, I need to show you something. Gestalt. Gestalt is an independent group. They also observe something. They realize that, pretty funny, but this bunch of people were more towards the European side. Okay? So it's not like you have Albert Thorndike coming in and pioneering everything. It's like when a field has developed to a certain extent, people will start to improve. You can split them by a vast ocean, but they will start to think of similar things. Alright, and this is repeated throughout history. If you look at calculus, same thing. Newton was actually the first person to come up with calculus. The dy dx that you learn in secondary school, pre-U maths. Newton came up with it, but he decided to keep it in his notes for 10 years. So nobody in the world knew about calculus. And then, but at that time when people started to think of all these things, eventually, I can't remember what's the guy's name, but another person started to talk about calculus. And that pissed off Newton, because he thought he came up with it, but too bad for him, he decided to keep it in his notes. So today, the world recognizes Newton and this other guy as founders of calculus. But the other guy, nobody really knows about him because he was destroyed by Newton. Political thing, again. Same thing, you're going to see it here. Alright? So, in American side, Thorndike started to pull the two ideas, the two approaches together. In European side, Gestaltists, after measuring all these subjective things, they also started to realize you can't always just look at components. You got to look at the end product. So, let's have a try again. I want you to take a look at this. Now, can you tell me, or can you use the mouse? So,
We
can't.
the house.
yeah, I can't see the map. Okay, where's the... Okay, I don't know where's the laser pointer. I'll find it later. So let me let's do this. Can you tell me, this one should be easy. What do you see here?
Cross.
A cross? Sure. Okay, some of you do see a cross. Let's try this one. What do you see? A spike ball. Alright. Anyone else seeing another thing? Hmm? Sorry, somebody said something. It came from here.
It's ball inside of it.
Yeah, it's a ball with some spikes kind of thing, right? Yeah. Actually, you're wrong. Technically, these are just a bunch of white squares and a bunch of circles. And that would be some, alright, differently drawn cone-shaped stuff. You just can't see the cone-shaped stuff. You just will see something that looks like a weapon. Alright, a morning, what do you call it? Morning star.
Right.
That's the weapon. And this, no matter what you tell yourself, no, I don't want to see the cross, I don't want to see the cross, but the cross will just smack right in your eyes. Alright? And that's what the Gestaltes are. Why is it that when we present components, at the end of the day, people just see patterns? So they started to investigate the end part rather than just the components. Alright? But without modern instruments, they didn't make too far headway. And secondly, they were going to be attacked soon by another group of psychologists. So the furthest they went, alright, before we go to where they go, this is the last thing. How many of you can ignore, okay, let me not prime you. What do you see? No, that's wrong. In fact, a Dalmatian dog, right?
Yes.
How many of you can die, just don't care about the dog and only see patches of random ink blocks? So there's just no way out, alright? And this is what the Gestaltists found out. Eventually, they feel that it's no good to always focus on the components. You really need to look at the organized endpoint. So they came up with this. This adage describes them. Their finding was always about what? The meaningful, bigger thing, which is what? And people just describe the Gestaltists as, those bunch of nerds, right? Always talking about the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. That's as much as they go. They also charted out, right, the various principles or formula about how people see patterns. So for example, they realized that when certain similar patterns, like similarity will become more obvious to you and you will interpret something as so. That's why you group 4 circles together and contradict that against the squares, because the squares are all similar. And they came up with other predictive formula, like your mind will always do closure. So there are gaps here, but instead you will just close up the gap. You don't really see the gaps here. This is still not so clear, right? Look at this. This is the one. All these dots, right? They are far apart, but somehow your mind will join them up, like you are playing join the dots. So you see this figure as a dot. Okay? So the Gestaltists came up with a lot of formulas. All these principles can predict the endpoint, the function, like the purpose of how we observe patterns. Now, they also wanted to know what went on inside the mind, but at that time, there was no MRI machines, there was no EEG, so they couldn't make headway. Then they were attacked by another group. Remember just now I said Edward Thorndike? So by the 1920s, the world has gotten smaller, meaning what? Communication became more established. And the Americans, right, by then, ever since Thorndike, right, they were very, very obsessed with measurements and testing. So by then, Edward Thorndike, this group of people, right, they already pushed Freud to the side. Freud came up somewhere in the 1980s. Later you see him there. But to go with the chronology, Freud came up in the 1880s. He was still young back then. By 1890s, somewhere mid-1890s, Freud made a name for himself. He became famous. And he started to profess his idea of psychology. But Freud was very philosophical, and he hardly provided any evidence anyway. He always cited his patient's experience. Now remember, if he always cite patient's experience, what makes him similar to what kind of investigative method is he using? Introspection, very much like the structuralist, right? Full of flaws. So he never properly measured things. So Edward Thorndike decided that we shouldn't just wait on people's report, we should just observe them from a third party's point of view, so we will not be influenced by their subjectivity. And initially it was devised on animal studies. Later on it was devised on humans. So the humans were always grouped into studies but never told about what they should expect. So they don't know, they just go through their usual responses, and then on the side they were observed. Initially they made some errors by observing, and then people got pressurized, so their reactions wasn't that great. Later on, right, they improved, and these people are called the behaviorists. They are called behaviorists because they, on the sly, right, without telling you, they will observe your behavior. So now there is no more subjective responses from the participant. Okay? And because of that, they got a lot of useful information and data. Then they became obnoxious. They started to tell all psychologists in the world, if you cannot remove subjectivity, don't even talk about psychology. And that's how obnoxious they were. And because they were able to show a lot of facts, their standing, their popularity shot up. All the universities recognized behaviorist work, but downplayed every other psychologist. So they became so powerful, they basically kicked structuralists and functionalists, because structuralists, what's wrong with their research method? Can you still remember? What's wrong with their research method? What were structuralists using? Introspection. And what's wrong with it? It's not accurate, subjective. Functionalists, do they even make any experiments, testing? No, they like to philosophize. They like to speculate. What is the purpose of this behavior? That's it. So behaviorists came out, they said, you got data to back you up? You got evidence to back you up? No? Go fly kite. Of course, they don't say it in Singlish, but they literally invited these people to go fly kite. So they kicked the structuralists, and people who call themselves structuralists, they couldn't find jobs as psychologists. People who call themselves functionalists, they relegated back to philosophers. So then they became ousted. The Gestaltists was also kicked out, but luckily they were rediscovered later. And we'll come to that shortly. So this bunch of people, look at the red color, read the red color part. Alright, some of the pioneers in behaviorism. Now I don't have Edward Thorndike's face here, but he is usually not associated. He was one of those earlier thinkers in behaviorism, but Edward Thorndike is actually associated. He has a title. He is called the father of educational psychology. Because when he first proposed behaviorism, he didn't then go on to do all the research purely in behaviorism. He developed this field, then he used the methods to try and find ways to improve education system. So that's why educational psychology is credited to Edward Thorndike. But the people who took after him, right, like this guy, John Watson, and someone called Ivan Pavlov, you won't see him here, but in lesson 5 we'll have more about him. So these people, alright, especially John Watson, became very arrogant. Because he got all the data to back him up. Alright? Now I'm not gonna, he made a claim about how we humans can control future generations through meddling with their behavior. I'm not gonna cite you the quote here, it's very famous. Just go internet, search for quotes by John Watson, you'll be there. But the thing is, this guy became very arrogant, and because of his movement, he basically killed off structuralism, functionalism. I think if he had improved them, that would be good. There's no need to kill them off. All right? And he strongly advocated that all kinds of behavior should be studied based on measurable observations. Otherwise, don't talk. And that's why after that, right, there was no other fields of psychology, that the only branch that flourished was behaviorism. Then you find it strange, today got social side, got developmental side, got clinical side also. Where did all this come from? Now, this guy started it, became very arrogant about it, and Skinner was very obsessed about it. Now, in lesson 5, we will look at the two differences between this and this guy's concept of behaviorism. Today, just know that they believe strongly that all your behavior, right, is really a reaction to some form of stimulus or stimuli. By stimulus, I mean what? Other humans interacting with you, they provide a trigger for your reaction. Even if there's no human, maybe you sit there, you do nothing, and you got bored, and then, you got bored watching the TV, that boredom is a stimulus. So they were advocating that all your behaviors, they are part and parcel of all these reactions. Okay? Now, one person survived, well, at least a few, not one. Freud, he came up earlier, he survived. Why? Two things. First of all, he was already very famous. So, in those days, right, fame speaks a lot. So people dare not totally discredit Freud. Okay, then you ask it, but Wilhelm Wundt, founder. Well, by the time we reached the 1920s, Wundt was old and maybe dead already. So it's okay to discredit him. He couldn't be around to fight. But Freud wasn't. Freud was around until the 1960s. So when behaviorism came up, alright, he was around until by 50s, he was too old already. But he was there, alright, to make a stand. So they couldn't discredit him. That's the first point. Second was, he was actually, by today's standards, he would be a medical doctor, specializing in psychiatry. And he helped hundreds, if not thousands of patients. So you can't discredit this kind of thing too. So his idea of psychology, which is called psychoanalysis, survived the onslaught. Okay? But today, we downplay him because of lack of evidence. A lot of things that Freud said is not correct, but we didn't wipe him off the slate of history. Now, some other people who didn't like behaviorists, alright, these were the people like Carl Rogers, Abraham Maslow. They actually came up later. They were they were not the only ones, but they were the few pioneers who resisted the behaviorist movement. But it was a very tough fight. There were a lot of psychologists in other fields too. They dare not call themselves anything except behaviorists. Because the moment they call themselves if they call themselves educational psychologists, they have to show that they are using behaviorist methods. If not, right, they get no job. So that's how bad it was back then. They really play politics to kill off the same contemporaries. But these two, they got a name from this. Why? Because Carl Rogers, again, he helped hundreds of patients. So he wasn't destroyed. Abraham Maslow was like Daniel Goleman. He came up with something very popular. People loved it, so he wasn't pushed away. Alright, so what's the moral of the story here? What lessons have you learned about psychology? Good. What else?
It keeps getting rebounded. A lot of things that get rebounded and on
What can make us very convincing?
evidence.
Alright. Now let's not talk about the wrong and ugly things they did. But if you want to be convincing, you just fall back on evidence. So if you want to somehow influence people, evidence, the way to go. Alright? Maybe a few hundred years ago, evidence wasn't the in thing. Today, it is the in thing. Started about 100 years ago, and there's no running away from it, right? But to be evidence-based, is it enough? Yeah, it is not enough. You've got to be searching after a more correct kind of evidence. So that means if after one experiment, do you say that, oh yeah, I got one experiment, yay, let me tell you about this. Yeah, we don't. So we wait for people to repeat and then we look at it. All right, that's what the behaviorists did. They ganged up, they created multiple experiments. They didn't cheat by pooling all their data together. That's why it was clean. They separately, independently came up with different experiments. So they were one of the first few groups that used independent data as evidence. They were very convincing. They could wipe out the rest of the psychologists. And you need to rely on age-old political practices such as fame in order to be not wiped out. Now, last thing before we go for the break. For 50 years, 1910s all the way until 1960s, the behaviorists were like king in psychology. And they were obnoxious. They pushed everyone out of the way. But they also created a lot of resentment. A lot of research was still being done. Very little funding goes to those research. Like behaviorists will not do any research on, for example, memory. Why? Because they say that you can say that there's memory. Can you directly measure memory? Not really. Because if you want to measure memory, the one way out is, for example, if I give you a bunch of numbers to memorize, and I ask you to recall after 2 minutes, it's a test of memory, correct? But are you reporting or am I uncertain? If you are reporting, I don't want it. That's what the behaviorists say, right? Because there is going to be subjectivity. And then back then there's no X-ray machine, no MRI scan, no electroencephalograph, meaning the brainwave measurement. Basically, all those people who did all this memory work, they sure lose. So, but their work was fair. Their work was also reliable. In fact, sometime in 1930s, right? One of the psychologists called Chen. Yeah, I can't remember whether he was from China or from Hong Kong, but he traveled to US. He discovered that humans are not the only ones that could think. All right, father of educational science, Edward Thorndike, he never believed that animals could think. To him, only humans can think. And he had experiments to back him up. But later on, we realized some of the experiments were just flawed. But he didn't know back then, because research methods weren't invented until about 1920s, 1930s. But Edward Thorndike was already talking about things in 1910s, 1920s. So he arrived a bit earlier, okay, before using the newer methods. Now, so Chen published in 1929 or 1930, showing evidence that actually animals not only behave, like the behaviorist said, but they also have some form of thinking. Like they are able to create maps of the environment. And people who came after Chen started to show that even rats can form maps of the environment. Although they don't have direct measurements of brain activity, they had behavioral activity of the rats to show. So that got some favor from the behaviorists. But you see, it amounted evidence of thinking. So the behaviorists stopped all these experiments openly, but on the less funding level, they were being conducted, and they amassed a lot of things. So for 50 years, there was a lot of findings and insights. And it's a waste to just throw them away. So sometime in the middle of 1960s, right, a bunch of cognitive scientists, meaning these people are dealing with thinking, they gang up together, they decided to start a revolution. They started seminars, they started to show the world that, look, you want evidence? We have evidence. Want data? We have data. We may not be able to do things directly, but we have enough to tease out all this subjectivity. It's there. With that, right, people like this guy, all right, he started to come under fire. He was revealed to like God in psychology from 1930s, around mid 1930s, all the way to mid 1950s. And that's not all. Because, right, of their movement, they even suppress fields such as linguistics. Linguistics is a branch looking at how humans create language and make use of language. It is a subfield in psychology, but they have their own knowledge. But they got hit very badly by people like this. So, when the cognitive psychologists decided to do their revolution, they got allies. Some of you might have heard before the name called Noam Chomsky. If you are interested, you can go and Google. He's a very famous guy because his book, brought down Skinner. At that time, Chomsky was basically a PhD student. So his experiments showed that, it is not always just a reaction to external environment that language is formed. Yes.
There's a question by Rebecca. She'd like to ask Stuart what besides legitimacy in psychology currently.
Okay, hold on. I finish this part, you let me know the question so we can go for the break. So now, Chomsky, by today's standards, we call a neuro-linguist. Back then, they don't have that term yet, so it was just normal linguist. He wrote a book based on evidence, all the experiments showing that cognitive psychology, they are valid. And his contribution was the linguistic part, where he showed that infants have some idea of language. They don't wait for parents to teach them, all right, so that they can acquire language. In other words, right, Chomsky demonstrated that we have a certain preference to certain types of language because it's hardwired before we're born. All right. So in that case, we're not going to be able to learn all languages with equal ability. But Skinner, before Chomsky made that statement, Skinner was saying that language, right, was learned because it was taught by parents and then later on by teachers. And all these people simply provided the external stimulus to allow the children to learn what symbols are. Alright, notice external stimulation and understanding of symbols versus something that was burned into your DNA. So they clashed, but the evidence showed that Skinner wasn't so right. And at the same time, it was supported by cognitive psychologists. So Skinner's popularity dropped a few notches. Now, psychologists didn't just kill off the behaviorists. We decided that we shouldn't be as obnoxious as them. So they continue to recognize behaviorists. Behaviorists actually, after that, right, they continue their research into the 80s, 90s, giving more refined insights to human behavior. But one thing was that psychologists then decided that we should recognize every branch of psychology. Because every knowledge is useful knowledge. It's how you use it. Right? So this ends the second era. But we will look at so the first era was all the structuralists, functionalists. Then the behaviorists came up and their downfall with the start of cognitive psychologists and the revamped thinking in psychology, that's second era. When we come back from the break, we will do two things. I'd like you to then go into a discussion group and think of what are some important lessons about mindset, about the spread of knowledge you have garnered from the stories in the history of psychology. Then two, we will finish up with the final modern era of contemporary psychology. Okay? So subsequent lessons in the future, we will look at more specific areas, different branches of psychology. So then you will have a comprehensive picture of this. Okay? Question? Time now it's just 9:30. I see you are at 8:50. Okay? And Sarosh, the question?
Yeah.
Maybe I go
there
over
was
it.
a question. Sure.
Then you can go for your breakthrough. Who is that?
Rebecca.
Rebecca, are you still around or do you want to answer after the break?
Hi, I'm still around.
She's still around.
Okay, don't worry, it will just take a minute. Who has the final say? Actually, it's a consensus, even back then. But the thing is, like the behaviorists, right? A few of the pioneers who have a lot of influence, they gang up together and insist that people do experiments or they just go and retire. So this tradition is still ongoing. Usually every year, different branches of psychologists will gather together in a symposium. Then they will discuss the findings, and then they will set new directions for research and new directions for application. So all these new directions will then determine the kind of theoretical directions that people will take, and some things that are um, that are being agreed upon, they then become put into textbooks. All right, like until they are changed. Yep, that's a consensus.
Okay, thank you. I was just worried about which
There's no
articles to put into
the
essays.
we don't believe in monarchy. But you wonder, right? A bunch of people say as kings. I think this is about humans are gonna take generations to change.
Sorry to interrupt, Mr. Lam. Your voice was echoing just now. Can you please repeat the answer?
Repeat the answer. Can you type it?
You can type? Okay.
I'll type it in if it was echoing for you just now.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Lam, are you still there?
Hold on, let me try.
Or you mute that side, maybe it will work. Yes.
Hi, I'm Tirtha. I just wanna know, was there any mention of assignments? Because I missed the first 10 minutes of the lesson.
Not yet, because people were still coming in. So we will talk about the assignment later.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Lam. Thank you.
That's all. No more question, and I will go drink my water. Going once, going twice. Yes, the break is until 8:50. Okay, see you.
Sorry,
Break-
can I just check, was the voice okay right now? Was it still echoey?
God. We have to check later.
Okay.
You won't do you much faster. I don't have to give so much details about for you to prepare you for the discussion. So what we're gonna do now is I think there are 15 of you all here. You someone of that. And there are only one person. Okay, so we're split into for the classroom, we're split into 3 groups. The same with online thing. All right. So what you will discuss is based on the stories so far, okay, first and second era. What are the insights and what have you learned about? Maybe I'll just put it general, easier for you all to discuss. All right, basically, what insights have you gotten? What have you realized from the story so far? The history, actually, more like. Okay. From the history of psychology, what kind of insights, what kind of realizations have you gotten so far? Later on, we may not have a chance for every group to present. We'll look at the time. Okay, so keep your points short. Maybe we break up. I was thinking of 10 minutes. We even have 10 minutes. Private time now. If I go, okay lah. So we will gather again at 9 or 5. Right now, you just get to your groups over here. Okay, so 3 groups. Each group should be about 5 people. Outside. Okay. Yeah. Thank you. From the history of psychology, what are some insights or realizations you've gotten so far? A lot of people usually, sometimes when they listen to stories, they look at history, they realize certain things. Okay, we haven't gone in depth to the various findings, but we are just looking at history. So what are some of your insights, realizations? Okay, so we meet again in 10 minutes, 9:05. He never got girls.
Moving this stuff about things. Like you are not this on as the sense psychology. So the very video, yeah, one for this now. You can get this kind of it's very common to have a connection. So why want to just my mom is like guys only year important shower. So I'm more mental the father even if I just
Before the story, it kind of actually so like the police are very very one you then the form when you think especially at your point when you're why and they have been some in the early show when I started being slightly at the starting by reasons. You want to further go or you see this?
see you don't need to it was like it's so complex and but you find it in less than the first hours. Yeah, first of all, people look at some of the people, they want to from that, or some them from because you're in all the highlights from filters also parts. If you look to the more lights, then also you see from my person and just it's a nice one. Yes.
Yeah, it's not something some that they do station that long we got a result right on the other they're working, and like what so when I working that with the uniform, different bit of that, easy to one and look at that and make it even your mention is changing all that. They also, I think, also, considering about and the problem from the realization that you're saying, all of these tools have to work together.
All the top
Now,
all the
and
kind one.
yeah, but you don't think that it's like all of it. Yeah. I think it's important. Yeah, and the.
So that's what the big
Yeah.
something like
That's it. Except on first floor. And what section? Something there. The presentation is wow, like the over the world, like yeah, like the game.
Because it's like them on them, right?
I don't even know what else.
It's really is the this is the true part of it. Most people get okay. This is open line and small. That's why I started because well, I still have a different words now. There's also so many things I know that I want. I thought so involved in great development. Now you want to set a goal on and let's take together the one before, so if you don't follow that, you'll.
Open mind to really work set another influence. Like you said, that a lot from getting the focus.
And then you will come.
That's what I mean, like.
Yeah, sure, come like, make sure. Just come, that is so.
What do you mean?
The participants from.
Well, let's take a look.
You want to?
Yeah, let's take a look.
Should I?
There are some people who.
These stories are more.
Oh, no, this was just me checking in.
Oh, okay.
Should I?
Okay, let's project it.
Okay.
Take a look through the list.
Yes.
Yeah, featuring on.
Really.
Oh, yeah, that's the objective string to it.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
No, I gotcha.
But can, when they speak, is it?
Yeah, they can see you.
But the sound quality?
The sound is also okay.
Yes, right.
Oh God, wait, hold on.
I think one second. I think it's 18. No, just now 3 groups 7, I mean 21.
Still okay, yeah. Okay.
Okay, now we don't have much time, so what will happen is we will invite one person from the online group, right, to talk about what the insights, the realization, and one person from the class here. Okay, so we start with someone from. Oh, okay, so let's see. Can you all hear me? I'm looking away from you because I have to look at the screen. Anyway, someone from the online group. When you did your discussion, all right, if you feel very strongly about some insights, realization, can you please share with the class what that insight or what that realization was? Okay.
Hi, Mr. Lam.
Yes.
Okay, I'll
Can I
share
call
on
you
my group.
Rai or do we call you Tata?
Oh, anything is fine.
Anything instead?
Yeah. Tirtha, all right.
Yeah, I'm just putting it. Okay, Rai.
Okay, can. My group has a lot of things to say, but I'll just summarize a bit.
Uh-huh.
Okay, the first one is psychology is like it's like a not a one size fit all,
Mm-hmm.
and it has its own strength and shortcomings. Psychology is not based on mind and behavior only, but it's more like evidence based to actually analyze
If you
how
say 3
we
points,
perceive things.
then the class won't be able to say.
Sorry.
You have said
Sorry,
3
Mr. Lam.
points actually.
Oh, I already mentioned 3, is it?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, then
So
I'll
now they are stressed
Yeah.
because then they have nothing to say.
Okay, I will let others continue then. Yeah, that's all from us.
Okay, that was a good summary. She did mention there are 3 points. There's no one size fits all. All right. Then basically it's to say that humans are very, very diverse. Now there can always be further thoughts about it. If you all think about it, if humans are so diverse and we cannot find something universal, then why is there even a need to discover psychology? Because if everyone is different, there is no formula, there is no prediction. There can be, of course, better knowledge, better understanding, but what is the point? That means, what is the practical aspect there? If you know a lot about something, but it is so diverse that you cannot have something universal, you cannot have a predictive formula to it, what is the use then? Okay, think about it. Sometimes realizations can breed more questions. So, if you go back and think about it, is there really no universal at all? Can psychology be so diverse that there is no application? Obviously, these are questions, but obviously it is also, the answer is no. Because in that case, right, people like me will be out of job, so diverse. We won't be able to help people. Right? But I like you to keep, like what she said, like the extra insights in mind. Because later on when we deal with the various topics, you'll find that every one of them has certain ways of being applied. Alright? So the questions will guide the way you absorb the knowledge. Otherwise, it's just a bunch of theory, it gets very dry. Okay, let's hear it from someone. Class? Anyone? You have an additional point beyond what Ryan mentioned. Yes.
We discussed a few different points. One of the things that I said was that the theories from the time we started until now, it also evolved as mankind evolved and how we found decisions or found growth, whether it's technology or anything. So then how we want to find out how thinking psychology also deal with that. So it's like an evolving way. The other thing we also talked about was status and exposure was very important to get the point across in each story. If you don't have a name to it, you can't get the point across.
True.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, we are not going to cover social psychology. Alright? It used to be in the syllabus, but I think not here anymore. There should be, some of you should be attending one module by itself. Okay, so you will learn about how individuals can influence the group and how a group can influence the individuals in terms of decision making, in terms of forming attitudes. So all these are part and parcel of psychology. And we are looking at applications, how influence flow. Now, having said that, right, of course, there's something else that Stephanie mentioned. What was the first one?
Delusion. It also evolved as many.
Yes, delusion. Yeah, thank you. I thought that was a splendid point. Why? Now, what makes us survive until today? One of the things should be diversity, isn't it? Because you see, if it's all dictated by someone, then it's very simple. Behaviorists would win and continue to win, but it's not. And when there are a lot of ideas, the ideas will then help the group flourish. Because sometimes when there is weakness, you find that no matter how strong a group is, there will be one chink in the armor. And that's where the diversity comes in to feel that we may not be the best of the best with diversity, but at least we can first make sure that we will survive, we will not become extinct. Next, it is also up to the people who are surviving to make use of the knowledge and seek out real meaning and happiness. And that's where ethics comes in. Now, what does that tell us about ideas, extreme ideas like terrorism? You see, it's possible to push a lot of things in psychology, of course. Do you think terrorists are promoting one idea or diversity? One idea, because it's their way or you die. Meaning it's either my way or my way. There's no your. But it may, even the strongest group, if they do this, they are probably going to survive because they are strong. They are probably going to survive and dominate. But for what? Do you think the world will not change? Even if we humans don't change, the environment will change. Sooner or later, something will change, and you find that again we have to fall back on diversity. But anyone proposing a singular idea will sooner or later hit a snap. Right? So, this idea is not about anti-terrorism. What I'm saying is, in diversity, there can be harmony. It's all about leveraging on the diversity to make sure that everyone can survive and grow happily. So that is the premise behind psychology actually. If you think about it, psychology studies humanity. There is so much differences in all of us. That is why it's a heavy subject. So that's the last point. Alright, all your insights are very useful. I'm basically just distilling out those things that is going to bring you forward. Because some people will feel that, later on when we learn about all this, it's going to be so much information. Just try your best. Okay? I will give you tips along the way to help you with the exam, but it's not possible for you to absorb everything. Okay? It takes time to accumulate knowledge. But what you have accumulated, always think, apply to myself, how can I apply to others? And then you will find more insights as well as greater use of what you learned. Okay, that is the meaning behind psychology. Question? Okay, great. So let's go back to the slides. Yeah, what's how to do this? So next time I'll just click. The other day we couldn't practice this because the screen was. Did you eventually replace the screen? The one,
Which one?
the one at the top. It was
The top
that
one.
day when I came for practice. It was just
Oh.
flashing, and then all the noise.
Okay, I had people just ringing right now. Sorry, I said that. Is it okay if he stays here?
All right. Let's thank Stephanie and Rai for their sharing. And we move on. So you've learned a bit before the break. We have this. All right. Now, by the time we reach here, you find that there is no more like big chief. From the time of cognitive revolution onwards, all the branches of psychology, they are usually headed not by one big shot. So you won't see any big names from now on. Instead, right, how do people set the direction? So every year, you find that there will be a symposium somewhere for every branch. And in this symposium, they will share all the key findings from the various research, testing, and observations out there. And then the bunch of people will discuss. They will discuss, and then they will think of what is the new direction for research. Then if there's any funding, the funding will be moved in that kind of direction. And what are some knowledge that has been shown to occur in all the testing? They will then take all this up and set it into like textbooks. So these are like almost a proven knowledge. So people learn from this. Now the flow from this way of organizing things is that the flow of knowledge is slow. Because you need to take several years, not that long, but usually 3 to 5 years, for various researchers to research on the same topic independently, and then they still have to meet and converse their findings, and then they have to iron out if there's any special differences to retest some of the things. But in this case, we are sacrificing a bit of time for the sake of accuracy. Okay? Otherwise, can you imagine all the inventions like all these things like you put the speaker to the abdomen and your child will be smarter. All these things will run rampant out there. Okay? Now, some of these things are just details for you to read. We will talk about them when we reach there. There's a topic in lesson 6 on cognitive psychology. So here, during this topic, I only wanted to stress that cognitive psychologists, they are the people who investigate into human thinking. Now, before you jump into thinking, oh, human thinking is just thinking, it's not. They talk about how information is perceived, so there's sensation and perception. Then that's why the Gestaltist was resurrected. Gestalts looked at how humans perceive information on a bigger scale. But then after that, they got thumbs down by the behaviorists. So during the cognitive revolution, their work was rediscovered again. Actually not, was recognized again. By then, the Gestaltists are no longer around. So today we hear of this thing called what? Gestalt therapists. It's a different thing. Gestalt therapists are people who make use of psychotherapy techniques, but they focus on trying to reach the patient's deeper meaning, the bigger story, in order to help them. But the Gestaltists, right, back then, those people who look at thinking of the bigger picture, cognitive psychologists took over and they applied modern methods of investigation. For example, they even put people through MRI just to look at which parts of the brain will start to become active when people perceive meaningful wholes versus looking at tiny things. Okay? So that's one thing where, of course, cognitive psychologists 70s to about 90s, they weren't so into the biology yet. They were looking at the way people behave, the way all these little things, how it affects people's thoughts. But by the 90s, right, biopsychologists came into the picture. So nowadays you find that there are a few branches they just combine together. That's why there are people like what clinical neuropsychologists like me. We deal with the applied therapy, but we look at brain and behavior. In probably the third lesson, I will show you, all right, a video about findings from Germany and Korea, how they work together. That even eating one meal, you may lose your ability to make proper decisions. Normal meal, not your usual potato chips. So a lot of the chemicals in your body may affect the way you behave. All right, and it doesn't take a lot to change you. Now, so back to here, cognitive psychologists deal with what? Sensation perception. Then they look at language, they look at memory, and finally they look at problem solving processes. So all these are part and parcel of thinking. And if you notice, they are literally like reviving the structuralists. Thinking is not just thinking. Thinking is about information processing. It's about attention. It's about how you receive information, components, right? Very structuralist first. So that is the beauty when we reach 70s. We finally recognize diversity and how we can work together in harmony. Alright, recognizing every field has its use. Now, some fields didn't get destroyed. Part of the reason because they weren't fully formed at the time. So, whilst the behaviorists tried to attack, they didn't attack at all angles. So some fields, they survived. And some reasons why they survived was because they also adopted behaviorist methods in their investigation. One of these will be developmental psychology, looking at human behavioral changes as we age. Now, sometimes you cannot just rely on their feedback. You have to observe. Like for example, if you want to look at infants from 0 to 2 years, you want to look at their behaviors, what kind of developmental milestones there are, so you can recognize which baby is developing slowly and therefore needs more help. Right? So these kind of things, they have to rely on what? Observation. No introspection at all. After all, babies can't report. So when they do this kind of measurement, they look at the way they behave, they look at reflexes, how often, frequency, the behavior is like it. So they left developmental psychologists be, and they didn't get killed off. Over the years, they have accumulated a lot of information, alright, looking at certain patterns. So we recognize various milestones. Like when humans veer away from certain developmental pathways, sometimes we will wonder, maybe this person needs help. Or maybe we realize, oh, this person is just behaving like non-average. So then let's see what can be introduced in order to help the person enrich his or her own life more. Right? So that's what the developmental psychologists do. I think you have one topic on this, one module on this anyway, so I won't go in depth yet. This, I think only some of you will go through, and only if you take, I think the special, something's related to special education part, right? But to clarify, educational psychologists don't just look at how people can learn things faster. Of course, that's their aim. But there are two groups. First of all, people who are considered normal, meaning we use attention span resources, we use memorizing abilities like how another person would likely use. So most of us are used to this kind of methods. So the educational psychologists look at how we can enhance learning. Like some of us learn things by rote learning. What's that? That means repeatedly expose ourselves to certain information. So last time, remember you learned the times table, you basically just recite. It's a very boring thing. Now, the thing is how to make it more interesting. Of course, they have certain ideas. So for example, educational psychologists have found that whether you are looking at helping people who have learning problems, like people with autism, or people who are average, normal, the first thing to actually deal with is how to enhance the learner's attention. It's not so much the delivery of the information. It's actually to capture the concentration and also to enhance the length of time they can stay at the task. If these two things are, maybe I put it in a simpler way. Some of you have watched those Chinese fantasy shows where people fight, right? And sometimes they fly into the sky. Although it sounds ridiculous, but you notice that in such shows, they always portray two things. One, the way they fight in terms of strokes. Next thing is something called internal energy, right? And you can win a fight either because you have very fanciful strokes or you have internal energy. Of course, if you have both, then you are definitely the winner. But the point is, if you have only one type, right? Now, attention span is like the internal energy. Getting your interest using different ways of learning, like instead of memorizing, you may be trying to mold certain figures up and you play with the figures so that you can count as you learn the times table. So you are augmenting using what? Addition, alright, how to do addition and doing it quickly to help you with multiplication. That is the stroke. So why last time people just simply focus on one stroke? Because why? Our parents, our teachers, right, they learn that one way. Now they realize you need to have diverse ways. They enhance on the stroke. For some people, they first get their attention by what? By creating something interesting, maybe not even the maths. So in this way, they capture their deep focus first. So the deep focus, usually what happens is one part of the brain will light up. It is actually somewhere, so a bit of snippet in the next lesson. So if I turn my head this way, you do a scan, somewhere around here, near the middle portion, there is one part that helps you regulate your attentional processor. If you engage that part first, you will have easier way to understand things. So when people present tough information, if you cause that part of the brain to light up first, they are more active. Then somehow you will find that the person will understand the tough material faster than someone who didn't have that part. Of course, you cannot just put the electrode and then suddenly, yes, I can understand. So they use behavioral methods like getting their attention, all this. It's really targeted at one part of the brain. Okay? So now we know you can raise the so-called internal energy, you can do the strokes, and still help the person reach the how to learn faster, more efficiently. So that's what educational psychologists are focusing. They don't do so much on the direct stimulation of the brain. They look at manipulating the environment. They look at modifying people's behavior so that they can learn faster. And then this part I mentioned just now, so I won't go into detail. This is a branch of psychology that looks at the way people interact and the way people influence one another. Now, some people find it surprising. Like if you, for example, right, if you see someone here, all right, let's say one of your classmates, suddenly the classmate faints, fall onto the floor. Now there are so many of you. Do you think help will reach your fainted friend faster or slower? Common sense tells us if there's so many people to help, it will be faster. That's how people think, right? But that's not true. Time and time again, experiments in various countries, various cultures show one thing. The more people there is, the slower help is received. So what's the moral of the story? Next time you feel like falling sick, right? Must have people, don't go to a lonely place, then you should die. But go to places where it's crowded but not so crowded. So you have help coming fast, okay? So plan when you fall sick, okay? Kidding, If you can plan when we fall sick, I think we'll all plan to want to fall sick, okay? Unless you want MC. Okay, now, but my point back to here, the serious part is, looking at the way people influence, people interact, it shows us how we can do things faster. For example, you now know that when there is a crowd, help is slowly received. So then they went on to discover that one way out is to what? Is to make sure that equipment and training is always available. That's why you find that Singapore government puts a lot of AED devices everywhere. And the first batch of people that got trained wasn't just asking the citizens to all go attend lessons. We have reservist people, right, in the army. All the medics were recalled back. Everyone has to go through the learning and the testing again. So that we know in the open spaces out there, there will always be a high chance that someone who is also an ROD medic but knows how to use the stuff and they can use, right? Of course, they will have medics when you call the 995, they will also teach you how to do, but if you are familiar at least a bit with it, it's much faster. So that's what social psychologists do. They don't just look at interactions, influence, they also look at how to patch the loopholes. Alright? Sometimes they have to borrow from these people, like how to do the training so that you can overcome social barriers. And of course, sometime in the 90s, right, this bunch of people became the leaders in the field. Because now what happened is we are going to the root of things. Once you understand the biology of things, and the next part is actually neuroscience. So you look at the nervous system. Next week you will learn that the nervous system is not just the brain. You don't just think with your brain. So nervous system is the start of how all these behaviors begin. Of course, it is a reaction to the environment and such stuff, but the information that comes in from the outside world must be processed by your nervous system. When it makes sense of things, it will then generate the necessary behavior. Okay? So this is the field. If you take a look, there are so many fields, so many branches nowadays, because humanity is too diverse. So the only way for us to cope and to look in depth is to create many specialists. And then you say, but then if there are so many specialists, who is there to gel everything up? The gelling has actually started. You notice that nowadays a lot of things are like multiple words combined together. Correct? So as people specialize, they also keep in mind that they have to share and gel. So nowadays it's not surprising that you have actually three things. Like about 10 years ago when I was still doing my postgraduate, one of the module I took was psychoneuroimmunology. So that's multiple fields combined. We are looking at behavior and how your thinking, your attention span, the way you interpret diseases and health, all right, how that will affect your behavior and how these two will then raise your immunity or lower your immunity. Now the end product is what? Instead of relying only on medicine, we are looking at whether it's possible to change people's mindset so that they can resist COVID, they can resist cancer, or they can just resist falling down with flu. Okay? So there are these kind of things. So all these combinations, they are always there. Alright? But of course then you find that the lay people will complain, oh, we're getting tough. Yeah. I heard some sound. Yes.
Sorry, sir. Can you repeat that particular module that you took again?
I can't type it out. I write it out, you type for them. So people here can see and people in the online can read. I write it down here, you have it in the pen. Thank you. Stupid. I hyphen here, okay? It's actually just one word. So neuropsychology also outdated.
Well, thank you. That's really interesting.
You're welcome. All right, so there are more and more things combined together. We start to see certain pictures that are like a lot of people maybe up to 20 years ago they reject autism thinking that that is a mental health disorder, but the picture is becoming clearer and clearer that there are actually two types of autistic children. Some really have the nervous system, right? If you look at the way the nerve cells connect, there is a problem. So they really learn things slowly. But another group, they show specialized skills. All right, they have maybe the person has autism. They don't interact with others properly, but they play piano superbly. So and then or they analyze things at a way that is totally out of the box. That our creativity level pushed to the max also has difficulty catching up. So we are looking at humans actually evolving already. Evolving to what? Evolving into using the nervous system in a very different and efficient way. But the cost is because they are still in the transitional stage. So the cost is that they may not be able to interact with the so-called average folks properly. But that is not to say that they are having a disorder. For all you know, we are the ones who we happily and proudly call ourselves normal. We are the ones who will be phased out. Okay? Alright. This is useful. Why? Like I said, once we recognize diversity, we realize that maybe we are not so right. First off, we downplay our arrogance. Next, we work with these people. So we don't eventually get phased out. They also can gain from another aspect. That's how humanity can flourish, right? And finally, you learned about this just now. Positive side. The good side and the bad side. So I don't want to repeat the stuff again. It's rather worthy. It's meant for you to read and to recap the ugly side about psychology that we want to avoid. And the good stuff is that this branch finally decided that what? It will focus strongly on the strengths of humanity. Because all along, right, all the bulk of resources for funding, for research, for understanding, always goes to looking at the morbid side of life. Depression, helplessness, all right, punishment. But that is not the complete picture. You want to see both sides of the coin, right? So it was good that Seligman actually emphasized this. Only thing is he didn't do it in a fair way to other scientists, all right? But they will find a way around this law. You have to give them, these are huge groups of people. We are looking easily at 20, 50 years down the road. Then they probably will have harmony. Okay, now my interest, my income gets blocked by you. Of course, they are not happy. Okay, so earlier on you asked, there are many fields. Here is just a list of them. And basically, it's a summary of what we've covered. And you can see from there roughly when they all started. Okay, so modern psychology is not just one psychology. It is an attempt to understand various aspects of behavior using objective and measurable methods. Okay? And because of that, we have many different aspects of knowledge, which is listed here. Question? Okay, now, before I move on to the next set of slides, let me talk about oh shucks. I forgot to. I'm going to talk about your assignment. Maybe I can do this. Should be. Let's off this first. No, maybe not. Where's the? Actually, I just switched to one of these. Right?
So you don't need the PowerPoint anymore, right? You need this?
Okay. Let's do this. So this is all.
you have to click again.
Click where?
This one again. This one.
Oh. Then how does it project?
Like from this one, you can drag it to the other side.
Oh, just yeah. But if I do this, then see if it goes over, and then I will have to move my mouse over to do this. Okay.
Very good.
Yeah.
I'll check on the screen.
Did I open correctly? Oh no, this is the wrong one. Yeah. Where is the mouse? Oh yeah, this guy. Yeah, this is the one, the 2022.
Yeah, we did it on.
So okay. Move the mouse over. Okay, maybe I stop over here and talk a bit about this. Okay, the two textbooks. If you are keen on taking it, then yes. The one that most people find simpler is actually Kala. Alright, but if you want something more comprehensive where it has lots and lots of stuff and the thicker book, then you should go for the Martin Carlson book. Alright? In terms of understanding, that depends. Because different people have different receptivity to the language. Alright? For me, I prefer the Martin one. But people have told me that I am just another dry, boring fellow. So if you so you might prefer the Kala book. Okay? So I leave you to choose if you're going to buy, but this is what's going to happen. In order to help you, last time I will send out lots of all these core readings, but then it's also difficult for some people. So what I'm going to do is I can't give you the latest edition of this book. It's against the law. What I will do is I will give you 2 editions ago. I will send it out. I will ask the school to help send out the e-format. Okay, about 85 to 90% of the information is still valid inside. The 6th edition, all right, they updated some of the research to it. So even with an ebook that is 2 editions back, you won't be missing out much. Okay, because if you want to buy this, it's costly. I think if you go Amazon and buy it, it will easily cost you somewhere between $120 to $150. Okay, the Carlson book, yeah, Kala is cheaper. Kala is usually around $80. But anyway, so in case you feel that you want some more details, just use the book. Okay, maybe if you find that you cannot follow the content page because the information I give, alright, it's diverse. So then you use the index page, you will still be able to go to the chapters and read them. Alright. So you watch out for I don't know how the school will send out because the last time I used Dropbox, it is too huge for a normal email. So but the school may be able to send it across. Alright, if I use normal Gmail, all these kind of things, people will have difficulty. They have to go to the drive, they have to ask for permission. I use Dropbox, some people say I don't have Dropbox. So now the school will send. Okay. So that's the book. I will still give you a few readings here and there. They are some of them are a bit dated because they are like a summary of the basic stuff. So if you read from the textbook has a lot. Whereas an article that is particularly on intelligence, then it's just all there. Okay? So you will get 2 kinds of readings from me. One is that e-textbook, 2 editions back. The other thing is a few journal articles, alright, supplementing some of the stuff. The only thing is chapter 1 and the readings on research method and statistics, very simple ones. They are actually taken from the textbook. But I have photocopied out and put that at the side like chapters for you to read. Because those things are important and useful. Okay? Alright? Because the textbook is very thick. To find the pages, sometimes it's not easy. So look it up. Alright, the school will send it to you. Now, let's look at assignment. Okay, there's going to be a written test. This one, nothing much to say, just read. Written test, it's on MCQ. The other thing we want to highlight is there's an essay to submit. Now, this essay is not you probably go and write about it. Instead, I'm going to put it up on, I think this part I can't help it. I have to put it on Dropbox. So you will receive a link. Alright, one link. This link should be from Dropbox, saying that you are connected to the Dropbox folder. So inside this folder, there are 2 videos, part 1, part 2. Okay. Now, the 2 videos, they are episode 1 of a psychology documentary. Alright? So I split it into 2 because if I combine it together, it's slow to render. Alright, so I split into 2. The other thing is the resolution is not that great because I have to rip it and reduce the quality in order to get it free. Okay? Yeah. Otherwise, right, this place has to buy license, you have to buy a lot of licenses. But you can still watch it. Alright? More important thing is pay attention to what is being explained. Okay, so you watch the video, then what do you write your essay, right? After you watch the video is about a bunch of mountaineers. They are amateur mountaineers. They are trying to climb a mountain. But there are certain psychological issues that are covered in their adventure. For example, they talk about motivation. They talk about conflict in gender. And they talk about leadership actions. Alright? Decision-making processes. So, in other words, right, psychological processes are being used to what? Are being illustrated through a scene related to mountain climbing. So I like you to watch and the topics that you feel, hey, this one I remember. Last time, for example, right, let's say you are a mountaineer yourself, maybe you climbed some mountain before. So you watch the thing and you feel that, hey, I also did this before. Oh, same thing, we also face this kind of dilemma and then we quarrel. So this is just a literary thing. So I'm just giving you an example. So after watching, you feel that, hey, I like this part. So don't give a summary of the whole video. That's wrong. You should just, in a very short paragraph, describe the part of the video that resonated with you. It may not even be a mountaineer thing. You could be doing a project elsewhere, you're not climbing mountain, but you realize, hey, same principles. So all the psychological phenomenon demonstrated through the mountain climbing experience, as long as you see one part, you feel that, oh yeah, this one quite similar. So it doesn't have to be fully the same as yours. You find that, hey, I remember this, or I've seen this kind of things before in my friends. Talk about it. So therefore, in your essay, right, you include a small part of the what you watch, very small only, maybe half a paragraph, right? Because that will only get you a few marks, not all. Then explain why you feel that there is insight, there is something that is important to you. Describe and explain it in psychological terms. So in other words, right, you have to read. If you don't read, you might write in layman's way, you have no evidence-based theory to back you up, you're only telling me a story, go. Alright? So, when you write the story, when you tell people why this is insightful, this is impactful, this is important, support this with an explanation, alright, based on psychology. I think that was actually what was happening, that's why I found it insightful. And at the end of it, if you can also add on, but I think now that I've learned more, I feel that there is also another angle at interpreting this. So for example, if you want to criticize your original insight, you're going to get bonus marks. Because that shows analysis. Integrating what you have learned, reflecting, and then you show your newer insights to your original ones. Got it? Okay, so in a nutshell,
And that's fine.
yeah. So in a nutshell, right, this is what is expected of you. Okay, I'll run from start to the end. Watch the video. Select a part that you feel this one resonates with me. Write your insight, your realization about it, supported by your reading of the theories in psychology. Don't have every theory in, you won't have space. Just select between 1 to 3. Some people write in depth, so they can only put in 2. Some people they are very touch and go, so they write 3. But no matter how many, you need to support it with established evidence-based theories, like why you had the insights. 1 bonus marks. And the last part to do is, after you have said that, you criticize your original approach. You look at what could be a flaw in your, don't write too many, you will get extra mark on. Because if you criticize yourself too much, your audience will always wonder, how come you got so many flaws if you want to change your leader? That's not very professional. So you should build up your insight, then to show comprehensiveness, you attack yourself a little bit. To show that you have actually analyzed things. Got it? So this assignment trains you to watch, to read, to reflect on the information, and also to, if you want the bonus marks, to self-criticize, so you also learn how to think in a comprehensive way. Okay? Question?
Whatever you just shared with us, is there a soft copy document that we can refer to?
Inside. It's in your course profile.
Okay.
Too fast. Of course, below reader, I say a lot. Then here, the point format.
When the video be given to us?
Next week, you need to let the school know the email that you are using. Some people happily give only, and after that they use another email. So please, by next week, let the school know the email they're using, and then I will then link you all to that Dropbox.
You start writing this.
You can read up already. Okay, I think the video's title is also given. If you nowadays a lot of things are on YouTube, you might want to search and see if it's available. There, it's the first episode of this documentary called The Human Experience. If they have made this no longer like super copyrighted, it should be on YouTube. Okay?
Mr. Lam,
Yep.
there is a question by Yaren. Other than our written essay, what needs to be
Other than?
hard copy?
I can't hear clearly.
Other than our written essay, what needs to be on the hard copy?
Oh, that's it. There are only 2 things you are graded. One is the written test, MCQ. The other one is the essay. The essay is 800 words. Should be, unless we get knocked out.
No more than 800 words.
Of course, there will be a 10% grace now. So if you now make sure you follow APA format. The format writing, ask the school, they arrange for people to sit in workshops, alright, learning how to write the essay properly, following certain established conventions of writing. These are communications of writing that is universal in, actually not so universal, there are basically 2 major formats. But Singapore, Australia, basically this region all the way to Hong Kong, we usually follow the American writing style. Okay, so it's called the APA format. Then in UK, they sometimes follow another format. Although strangely, sometimes they follow something called the Harvard referencing format. Or even Harvard US. Okay, but never mind about this little politics. Alright. Over here, we stick to the universal way that is used in this region, APA format. Check with your school consultants or Sharosh out there about the APA format. Okay? I think they also put up the template for you all to see. So my concern is only the content. Question?
Mr. Lam,
Yeah.
about the video,
Mhm.
like, will you send us through email or we have to drop by for the?
No, it's Dropbox.
Oh,
So you will receive an email link.
okay.
Okay. So once I activate the connection, I think this app called Dropbox will send you the link. So you watch out for. Can you type Dropbox?
All right, Ken.
So is this app you're talking about?
Thank you, Mr. Lam.
Please don't forward the video. Alright, you notice I already have to make it a bit lower in resolution to share freely. Otherwise, we will really have to buy a lot of license and it's very troublesome.
There's one more question. Are there references required for the essay?
Yes, the references will be covered in APA format. So check with the school, they are giving the information about it. Alright, so you have to acknowledge other people when you read, you have to write down the references. Okay? Now, I think that's about all I have for the assignment. Any question?
Mr. Lam, the essay will be hand over hard copy or we need to print out to submit to school or email?
What's the rule now? Soft copy? Yeah, hang on. It's the
Actually,
people
Mr.
downstairs
Lam-
who know. Maybe you check and get back to them.
Yeah, actually, Mr. Lam, the essay assignment so far we have sent it by email in soft copy. But
Yeah.
for this one, do we have to send?
It should be the same, unless the school has changes.
Yeah, because
So this kind of logistics things are handled by the school. They will have you submit. Most likely, you will have to submit to where I usually conduct training. It's 2 copies. All right, soft copy, as in 1 hard copy and 1 soft copy. Okay,
Thanks, Mr. Lam.
but don't worry, the school will get back to you on this.
So it says maximum of 800 words, so there isn't a minimum.
Yeah, I was gonna come to it. So if you write right, and you follow APA format, try to make sure that you write within the cover page is not counted. So once you begin writing the title, it should be maximum of 3 A4 pages. Okay? I wouldn't deliberately go and count, but usually 1 piece of A4, if you follow APA format, it will contain about 250 to 300 words. So 3 pages, so anything beyond means probably you overload. So reference pages and cover page words are not counted. Okay? Yes, Sharosh?
There's no rule, it depends on the lecturer, but most of them are in soft copies.
So just some soft copy then. Just email back to the school. They will usually have to keep track anyway. Okay, there's like probably a lot of questions about this time. We're out of time. If I continue, we will have to break at 10:20. So instead, right, I'll tell you what, it's almost 10. This is a few more minutes to 10. We stop here. Next week, I will speed up the last part of today's lesson. Okay, it won't be long anyway. So we will finish in about 20 minutes, and then after that, right, we will go on to the next lesson. So I wanted to show you a video at the end, but let's wait until next week when we have finished the second part. Then you watch that video. Okay. All right. Any question for today? Cool. Okay, then I see you all next week. Thank you all.
Mr. Lam.
next week.
Thank you.
Thank you too.
Mr. Lam.
Thank you.
Good
Bye
night.
bye. Bye bye.
Don't we use Reach and MBIS too?
Yes, MDIS, and some foreign schools but it was during the COVID period. Like You know how somehow the name flew around. One of the University of Netherlands there.
Oh. I mean, we're talking way back, like 70 years ago. Very long.
Ah.
You also used to teach it.
Mm.
I think I was one of.
You were there? Oh,
I think 2014, 2013.
should be. I haven't been there for some time. I think the COVID changed a lot of things.
Yep.
Okay, see you, Luis.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you. Bye bye.